this International Military Tribunal is the first International Military Tribunal was established in the year 1945. And this International Military Tribunal was the result of the London Agreement. London Agreement was an agreement which was signed by the victorious countries after the Second World War. And this was signed in the month of August. And if you look at the agreement, you'll find that this agreement was not very long, and it was also having an annexer. The annexer was containing the Charter of International Military Tribunal. This Charter of International Military Tribunal was signed by the victorious allies, and those countries were France, UK, US, and USSR. The Charter of International Military Tribunal had 30 articles. So if you look at those articles, so these are the articles. You see, this was the London Agreement. You see, this was signed at London on 8th August 1945. And if you look at this agreement, it is having very few articles. And thereafter, you see that this is the Charter of IMT. And this Charter of IMT was having, again, not more than 30 articles. So you see that how many articles are there. So it was having, you see, 30. So this is the last article. So these articles of International Military Tribunal, that was there. But first of all, you must know that why was this International Military Tribunal established? As you all know that during the Second World War, all the parties, they were involved in commission of different acts. But the most outrageous acts were committed by the Nazi Germany. And if you look at Nazi Germany, the Nazis and their supporters, they were running more than 44,000 camps and ghettos and other sites of detention. And those camps, ghettos, they were having those people, Jews, and Jews were persecuted. They were undergoing forced labor, and they were also murdered. And that continued for more than a decade. So that was that had outraged the whole world. German people, wherever they went, they were engaged in all these kind of concentration camps, and then persecution of Jews everywhere, and then whoever were also their detractors, so they also were persecuted. So Germany did those acts. And when the Second World War was coming to an end, when the London Agreement was being signed, I told you about London Agreement, that was in 1943. In 1943, even before the Second World War was to come to an end, at that moment of time when London Agreement was signed, then what happened that the powers, the Allied powers, they had decided that they would do justice. And how will they do it? They had just had one thing in their mind, that they would kind of establish some tribunal, and that tribunal will mete out justice to the people, because most of the people were from Germany, and most of the perpetrators of crime were also from Germany. Therefore, it was envisaged that a tribunal will be located in Germany, and the people, local people, they will see that how justice was being meted out by the victorious powers. So with this aim in mind, what happened that in Moscow in 1943, a declaration was made, Moscow Declaration on Atrocities. And this Moscow Declaration uh, on atrocities, if you look at this Moscow Declaration on Atrocities, you'll find that this Moscow this Moscow uh, this Moscow Declaration on Atrocities, it was signed by all those four powers. And they had declared that the atrocities committed by German people, and particularly if you ask that why was in Moscow, because most of the Russian peoples were killed. Because Russian people in Russia, you might have heard that there was a Bolshevik revolution in 1919, and Stalin's government came to power there. So these Nazis, they did not even like those people who were communists or Stalinists. So most of the people, they were also killed. Russian people were killed. So Moscow was also outraged, and therefore in Moscow Declaration was signed on atrocities. There were many other declarations which were signed. And then you see that Moscow Declaration ultimately led to the drafting of London Charter, and this London Charter was signed when Germany surrendered itself. And the drafting of the London Charter was mainly the contribution of Robert Jackson. Robert Jackson was from America, and Jackson was serving in the Supreme Court of one of the states of US, and he was the associate judge in the Supreme Court. And Jackson was the person who had delivered a judgment in ex parte Quirin that had laid down for the first time in US the concept of individual criminal responsibility. So Robert Jackson's contribution in the drafting of IMT Charter is very important. Apart from Jackson, there were many other people, like there was one from Russia, there was one from England. And then after that, when the London Charter that was signed, then the whole preparations for the establishment of Nuremberg Tribunal, that was finalized, and thereafter you see that this IMT at Nuremberg that started functioning. As far as the judges of this IMT military tribunal at Nuremberg was concerned, the judges were from each of the victorious countries. So from United States, Francis Biddle was there. From England, Sir Geoffrey Lawrence was there. Likewise from France, Henry Babers, and from Russia, Anna Nikitchenko. So these were the members of the bench of International Military Tribunal. As far as the some of the things were there, that jurisdiction of the tribunal could not be challenged anywhere in the world. And the next important thing was that the decision of the tribunal could be taken by majority. So there was no such requirement that there must be unanimous decision. And apart from that, there were certain other important articles, and I will again take you to this one. If you look at the Charter of the IMT, you will see that Article 6 of the IMT Charter that provides for the jurisdiction. And this Article 6 is important in your exam also. If you see the questions from military tribunals, you must write at least this article. Article 6 says that this tribunal will have jurisdiction over 3 types of crimes. First is crimes against peace. Look at this, crimes against peace. What is the meaning of crimes against peace? You see, peacetime, during peacetime. So one who destroys peace and does something which is in the pursuance of destruction of the whole peace time of the whole world. This is called crime against peace broadly, but then it was defined and it was said that planning, preparation, initiation, waging of a war of aggression, or a war in violation of international treaties, agreements, or assurances, or participation in a common plan or conspiracy for the accomplishment of any of the foregoing. So this was crimes against peace. So, but we are not concerned with crimes against peace here in this class because we are in International Humanitarian Law class. We are not concerned with the violation of the laws of violation of the treaties which prohibit war. We are not concerned with that. We are concerned with that if a war takes place and then some crimes are committed, then what may happen? And there you will find that Article 6, paragraph B and C, that are very important. Then in the times of war, what can be the activities? So very important thing is war crime. And war crime was defined in Article 6B. It was defined as violations of the laws or customs of war. Very simple. What are war crimes? War crimes are violations of the laws or customs of war. And then further it explains what are the violations of laws or customs of war. It says that such violations include murder, ill treatment, deportation to slave labor, or for any other purpose of civilian population, of occupied territory or inoccupied territory, murder or ill treatment of prisoners of war or persons on the seas, killing of hostages, plunder of public or private property, wanton destruction of cities, towns or villages, or devastation not justified by military necessity. I have told you about the definition of military necessity. I've also discussed with you that how the civilian population must not be targeted during the war. Even when you take up any weapons, even then civilians should not be targeted as such. Civilians should not be murdered. Uh, in my class, when this pandemic was not there, when I was taking class, I had discussed with you prisoners of war and what are the laws to protect the prisoners of war. So now the Charter of IMT very clearly said that if there would be murder of prisoners of war, if there would be ill treatment of prisoners of war, if there would be the killing of hostages, or if there would be wanton destruction of cities, then that will be considered as war crime. And if you look at the history of Second World War, you'll find that the Second World War had all these things. And Germany, particularly, we have to take the example of Germany. In Germany, what happened? That the Nazis, they were doing all these things. Prisoners of war from Poland, prisoners of war from Russia, prisoners of war from England, prisoners of war from other allied parties. They were all, whenever they were detained, they were captured. Most of them, they were killed and they were ill-treated. So this was how this war crime was defined. And next is crimes against humanity. In the Charter of IMT, for the first time, this crimes against humanity that was defined. And this was a new kind of crime which was recognized at international level. What is this crimes against humanity? That was defined as murder, extermination, enslavement, deportation, and such other inhuman act committed against any civilian population before or during the war, or persecutions on political, racial, or religious grounds in execution of or in connection with any crime within the jurisdiction of the tribunal. So you see that this crimes against humanity is a kind of different category of crime which is particularly targeted at the civilians. And suppose if during the times of war, if the warring parties, if they target the civilian population, or if they persecute the civilian population on political grounds or on racial grounds or on religious grounds, then that may amount to crime against humanity. And if you look at the example of Germany, in Germany, the Nazis, they were doing all these things. They were deporting the Jews, they were murdering the Jews, they were trying to exterminate the Jews, and they had enslaved many of them.
So, I think there are students in the waiting list outside class. Please let them in.
All right, all right. Yeah, thank you. Uh, so, uh, so the crime against humanity, this was a different type of crime which was recognized for the first time, and these crimes could be committed against the civilian populations. And most important than these, different matters, subject matters of crimes, if you look at the bottom of Article 6, it says that leaders, organizers, instigators, and accomplices participating in the formulation or execution of a common plan or conspiracy to commit any of the foregoing crimes are responsible for all acts performed by any persons in execution of such plan. So you see that whoever be the leader, and even the accomplice, and even the instigators of such crimes, they would be also punished as if they were the perpetrators themselves. And then Article 7, if you look at Article 7, which is very important, and which was, this kind of concept was recognized for the first time in international law in the Charter of IMT. It says that the official position of defendants, whether as heads of state or responsible officials in government departments, shall not be considered as freeing them from responsibility or mitigating punishment. So you'll see that generally the defense of such people who are at the helm of the affairs, they say that they represented the state, or sometimes they will say that they got the instruction from the state. Then Article 7 of the Charter, it was amply clear that the official position of defendants, even if the defendants are heads of state, they would not be freed from the responsibility if they have committed these crimes above, which I have just mentioned. And also Article 8 says that if the defendant will take the plea in the court that they were acting because there was an order of the government, or the superior ordered them to do some act, and generally this is the defense taken up by the uh, by the by an average soldier of the whole war. This is the kind of difference which is taken. Then Article 8 was very clear. It said that if the defendant was acting pursuant to order of his government or of a superior, that will not free him from responsibility, but that may be considered in mitigation of punishment if the tribunal determines that justice so requires. So you see that if you look at the Charter of IMT, you'll find that these were some of the innovations which were made, which were incorporated in the Charter of IMT so that they could punish the perpetrators of war crimes and the crimes against humanity and the crimes against peace. And then if you look at the whole movement of the trial, and who were the persons who were who were facing the trial, those people who were arrested for the trial, those people were all very high officials of the Hitler's government. And 24 people were only selected to face trial for IMT at Nuremberg. And if you look at, I will not tell you the whole list of 24 people, but I will just tell you about some of the most prominent people who were there, who were facing the war crimes trial. The first was Kittel. He was the defense minister, de facto, and he was the head of Armed Forces High Command. So Kittel had done a lot of acts of which are called war crimes and crimes against humanity. And as defense minister, he had also violated many treaties. on peace, and therefore he was also facing charge of crime against peace. So Mr. Keitel, along with Goring, Goring was the head of Air Force, and Goring was, if you look at the whole, I will show you. I'll show you this photograph. I'll show you this photograph. If you look at this photograph, you'll find that you see this one. Where is this? Yeah. So you see this person. This person. Where is that? The first one. The first in the left. So you see this person. This person is this person. This person is Goring, and Goring was yeah. You see this person. This person was Goring. So this person. So this is the picture of the the place where defendants were sitting in the dock, and you see all these people. See, all these people were there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 10, 11, and then 11 at the back. So 22 people. And one died, and one could not face trial. So you see that this is how this trial that was started, and Keitel faced the trial. Goring faced the trial. Rudolf Hess, who was sitting just next to Goring, he also was very prominent member of Hitler's party and Hitler's government. Mr. Donage, who was the commander-in-chief of Navy, Mr. Ribbentrop, who was the foreign minister. They all, you see, these people who are so high and mighty when Hitler's government was there in Germany, who was persecuting against the Jews, they were all prosecuted before the IMT. And the trial began in November 1945, and then it went on for a year. And after the trial, 22 who faced trial, you see that these people were 12 sentenced to death, and 3 received life sentence. 4 received prison terms, and 3 acquitted also. It was not that this trial was just a kind of sham trial, or this trial was a kind of trial which was hell-bent to punish all the major war criminals. So this was not like that. And this was like a trial where, the new kind of precedent that was to be set. That look, during the war times, nobody is free to commit anything. So even if suppose the objective is very high and ideal sounding, like Hitler was saying that the German race is the superior race all over the world. So this kind of objective might be good for one person or a supporter of that person, but if to pursue that very policy, if you commit such serious crimes which may amount to now war crime and crime against humanity, now it's very clear, and that clarity came only after this trial. This trial came to an end, and during the whole course of trial. And most important thing that was done by Robert Jackson. Robert Jackson, I told you about Robert Jackson. Robert Jackson is the person who was a judge of the Supreme Court of America, and he was there, and now he became the chief prosecutor of the International Tribunal. So what I see that if you look at the jurisprudence of the IMT at Nuremberg, you'll find that for the first time, individual criminal responsibility that was laid down. Because initially it was very tough. We had been discussing international humanitarian law, which are contained in Geneva Conventions. And Geneva Conventions, if you look at Geneva Conventions, you see individual responsibility, that was not laid down anywhere. Geneva Conventions were only saying, giving the responsibility onto the government, onto the states to apply international humanitarian. It was not clear that if an official of the state would violate, because normally it is the people who violates, it is it is the individual who violates. So it was not made clear earlier that if an individual will do it, whether he or she can be prosecuted because he represents the state. So for the first time in this Charter of IMT, and thereafter during the whole course of trial, it was very much asserted that individuals commit the crimes, and therefore individuals can be punished. And this was the principle which was laid down in the judgment: individual criminal responsibility for the acts of government. The authors of serious criminal acts, it was held by the tribunal that the authors of serious criminal acts cannot shelter behind their official position in order to be freed from punishment in appropriate proceedings. So this was very important. Perhaps this is the landmark thing in the whole evolution of international. Then this was the start of international criminal law. IMT Charter started the whole new branch of international law that is now called international criminal law. And then, for the first time, crimes against humanity, it was clarified, cleared. It was held that the policy of persecution against the Jews was amounting to crimes against humanity because the persecution was properly planned, persecution was systematic, and the tribunal also held that if such acts of persecution were in execution of any crimes mentioned in Article 6, then it may amount to crime against humanity. And it was also made very clear that crimes against humanity may be committed during peacetime also. Before this tribunal, 16 defendants, they were charged with the crimes against humanity. Now we will move on to the jurisprudence laid down on war crimes. The tribunal made it very clear that if there is a planning involved on the part of state, and if there was a policy involved, and thereafter the combatants, they engage in the plunder, the ill treatment of civilians, then that may amount to war crime. In this case, what happened that there were many acts of plunder, ill treatment of Soviet civilians and property. There was also exploitation of slave labor. Many people who were captured, enemy commanders and Soviet high-ranking officials, they were murdered. Orders were issued and circulated. Like there was an order which was like, in the night you will be moved to a place, and there you would be forced to go to concentration camps. And maybe that before the dawn you may be killed. And the court held that the Nazis, these people who were facing the war crimes charges and other charges, in this case the tribunal said that they had violated some of the articles of Hague Convention of 1907, and the court held that Hague Convention was customary international law, was the example of customary international law. And the tribunal gave some examples like Article 46, civilians must be treated with respect. Article 50, no general penalty on civilians. Article 52, civilians not to be compelled to join as combatants. Article 56, buildings dedicated to arts, religion. And then the tribunal also held that these people, these Nazis, these high-ranking officials, they had violated Geneva Conventions of 1929 on prisoners of war, and they had expressly violated Article 2, which laid down that prisoners of war must not be killed. Prisoners of war, their rank must be respected. Article 3, prisoners of war maintained by detainee power. Article 4 was violated, and all forms of corporal punishment and cruelty on prisoners of war under Article 46 and 51, escape of prisoners of war that will not aggravate the punishment. All these provisions were violated. 16 defendants were held guilty on this charge of war crimes. So you see that important jurisprudence was also laid down after the conclusion of this trial after 1 year. So 45, the trial started in November. In 46, the verdict came, and 12 people, I told you that 12 people were hanged to death, and some people were also acquitted. So this was how you see that a new precedent was laid down with the trial. You see that it was not that many people say that this was just a trial by the by some mighty powers. Yeah, but there could be also the argument that most of the people from Russia, they were just saying that why we are engaging in a different procedure where we will again take time and we will have to feed them, and these people are all captured, so let us shoot them. But that was not done. There was some principle of morality which was involved, that let us do something which is natural, and natural means that war has to be, if war is to be fought, it should be based upon sound principles. If war is to be fought, it should not be based upon immoral principles and immoral acts and unlawful acts and brutal acts. If those acts are committed, then new example was set that there can be a possibility of prosecution. Now we will move on to the next tribunal which was set up, and this tribunal was set up in a different war theater. That theater was called the Pacific Theater of War. The Pacific Theater of War was mainly directed towards the Japanese. You might have heard that there was a time when Japan was, having the policy of following the policy of militarism. Only military people, Japanese sumo people like that. Those all fighters. So fighting was a passion in Japan. Japan was following this policy of militarism all over the world, and it was having problems with China. It was having problems with Philippines. So all the neighbors of Japan, they were facing threats from Japan's militarism. And during the Second World War, Japan was with Axis powers, with Italy, with Germany, and Japanese emperor and the whole government, military government. They were all involved in expansionist policies. And if you look at the atrocities committed by Japan during the Second World War, you'll find that you might have heard about a very infamous massacre which was committed in Nanking in China in 1937, where many thousands of civilians were killed, prisoners of war were massacred, people who were captured were put to experimentation, and then sexual slavery also were committed. Attacks were also made on hospital ships, and then many allegations are that Japan had used biological and chemical weapons like mustard gas, like sarin, etc. So when the Second World War was also coming to an end, I told you about Moscow Declaration. At Moscow Declaration, there was also kind of sense which was sounded that if we will win, then we will also try to prosecute these Japanese war criminals. So after the World War was over, and you are well aware that Japan surrendered in the after the Second World War, and treaty was signed And by the special proclamation, uh, Douglas MacArthur, he was the general of the whole commander of Allied forces in the Pacific. So he had issued a special proclamation. MacArthur's proclamation was issued, and if you look at MacArthur's proclamation in 1946, I'll just show you. You see that this was the Tokyo Charter. You see, this was the Tokyo Charter, and you see this one. So you see this one. This one is 677. So you see this one. This is the Tokyo Charter, and look at it. This is the Tokyo Charter. This is the International Military Tribunal for the Far East, IMTFE. So we will call it IMTFE, Far East, Far East. For America, Japan is Far East. So they had named it Far East. And you see that this was a special proclamation, establishment of an International Military Tribunal for the Far East. So this was the proclamation which was issued, and you see that this proclamation was made, and after that, again efforts were made to establish a new tribunal, military tribunal in Tokyo. And this tribunal was established after composition of a tribunal where 11 judges would be there. So all these judges, they were representing one or the other country of the Allied powers, like US, UK, France, Russia, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, even China and India and Philippines. All these countries, they were represented. And these 11 judges, they were all having some kind of sense, they were all having some kind of sense of experience at how Japanese, they had committed atrocities. One judge was also from India, and his name is, perhaps all of you might be knowing, Radha Vinod Pal, who was having a solid background in international law. There was also a prosecutor appointed by Indian government. So that was at that point of time, British government had appointed. So P. Govinda Menon was appointed as prosecutor. And from the US side, the prosecutor was Joseph B. Keenan. So all these people, they were there in Tokyo. And if you look at the whole trial, which was, because this was having 11 judges, and this was having not only 24 people, but 28 people on trial. So you look at this picture, you see that this is the trial room scene, and so many people are there, you see. So many people are there. So this was how this trial room, which was made in the Japanese Army's headquarters office in Tokyo. So you see that time always, time, we say that time flies, that if you, like I tell my students that if you will not prepare yourself for your exam, then the exam will force you to prepare yourself. And even then, if you will not prepare yourself, then you will lose, and maybe that some other people will give the same exam. So likewise, Japanese, when there was a time when the whole armed forces, all the issues of brutal killings, all the orders of torturing the prisoners of war, they were issued from this very place. And you see that now they were facing the trial, and most of them, they would be punished. So you see that how the fate of a person and how the time, goes, and it is not that the same time will be there every time. So you see that IMTFE, the Charter of IMTFE, is having 17 articles. I will again show you this this charter, IMTFE. This IMTFE charter is having this, you see from here, the charter provision starts. This is Article 1 and 2 and 3 and then 4, and then comes this 5. So Article 5 of the IMTFE charter defines this jurisdiction. And if you look at the subject matter jurisdiction, you'll find that again, three crimes were coming under the jurisdiction. One was crimes against peace, that I'm not going to discuss. Next is conventional war crimes. And again, here it is defined as violations of the laws or customs of war. And then the next is crimes against humanity. And again, I have already discussed that murder, extermination, enslavement, etc., against civilian population, or persecutions on political or racial or other grounds in execution of any crime, that will be called crime against humanity. So Article 5 is very important in the Charter of IMTFE. If you look at Article 6, again it says that neither the official position of the accused nor the fact that an accused acted pursuant to the order of his government or of a superior, that will be sufficient to free him from any kind of responsibility. So these two articles, Article 5 and 6 of IMTFE, you must remember for your exam that these articles, they laid down that this crimes against peace would be punishable. War crimes would be punishable, and official position, that will not matter. Article 13 of this charter, it said that evidence which are having probative value, that will also be admissible. So in such kind of tribunals, this was a military tribunal, and this was a tribunal which was established after the wartime. And during the wartime, what happens that at least in those times, that whole German city was burned. Cities were burned by the air strikes. Likewise, in Japan, most of the places were burned down. So you see that it was very, very difficult to get all the papers, all the documents. So sometimes some news clippings, sometimes some of the statements of some of the victims, all these may become important in such kind of trials. Therefore, Article 13 said evidence having probative value, that may be also admissible. And then there was a provision of appeal, that if you want to make an appeal, that will go to the political authority who was the supreme commander, like MacArthur will be there. And death sentence, that was also allowed. Because death sentence was allowed because although America did not, at least I can tell you about Jackson. Jackson personally did not like about death penalty, but it was the demand of the whole allies, especially from Russia, that no, we must have the death penalty because they had committed so much of atrocities. There should be punishment which should set an example. So you see that when this Tokyo trial that started in April 46, and then it continued till November 1948. So it was longer than the Nuremberg trial. And the acts which were examined by the tribunal, those acts must be committed since 1928 and up to the end of the Second World War. So with this background, the trial started. One of the defendants was found unfit for trial, and two defendants died during the trial. So this was how the whole setting of trial had started. If you look at the trial, which started, 28 high-ranking officials of Japanese Empire, those were indicted. And you see, if you look at the names, former Prime Minister, Foreign Minister Hirota, military commander General Tojo, another general Doihara, Foreign Minister Togo, they were all involved in different types of crimes committed by them. And 28 people were there. I have shown you the whole picture. And then I told you that Article 5, Article 6, and Article 13, all these are important. And thereafter, what happened, that the judgment was delivered. The Tokyo judgment was delivered by majority. This was not like Nuremberg, where most of the judges, they gave their verdict unanimously. But in this Tokyo trial, what happened, that there was a split in the verdict. 6 judges delivered unanimously, but then 3 dissenting opinions. However, the majority opinion was that there was the concept of individual criminal responsibility that is important, and they also affirmed it. They also affirmed the principle of command responsibility, saying that if there is an argument that acts were the acts of a state, they just followed the instructions of the state, that will not be saving their lives, and that would not be freeing them from any culpability. When the trial was going on, the chief prosecutor Keenan was from US. He supported his argument on the basis of ex parte query. I have given you this case name when I started, that Justice Jackson, he had laid down the principle in ex parte query for the first time in 1942, that individuals can be held for commission of international crimes. And in Re Yamashita, these 2 judgments Keenan cited were individual criminal responsibility that was recognized, and he argued that individuals may be punished by military tribunal for the violations of laws and customs of war. And he finally said that authors of such acts cannot shelter themselves behind official position. This was the statement made by the IMT at Nuremberg. So he also cited these things, and all these things were accepted by the court. The issue of dropping of bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was raised by the defense, but that was held inadmissible because of the fact that this was not coming before. This was not prescribed in the Charter of IMTFE. That the acts of US, that would be also that can be also questioned. So you see that some of these defendants, like Doihara, I told you about Doihara, General Tojo, General Matsui, they were sentenced to death. 16 defendants were sentenced to life imprisonment, and 3 died in prison. So out of 28 people who faced indictment, only 7 defendants were sentenced to death. And most of the other defendants, they were given life imprisonment, and then some died also in prison. Now, if you look at the criticism of these military tribunals, you'll find that most of the criticisms are that it was an example of victor's justice. You see, all the judges, they were from the victorious powers, and all the prosecutors, they were also from the victorious powers. So this is the common criticism, that this was the victor's justice, or hegemonic justice. You see, that hegemony, whoever wins, they can constitute the court, and then they will try to show the whole world that they are doing fair thing. But fair trial was not held. Most of the criticisms are that what were the kinds of rules of procedure, and if you look at the rules of evidence, those were tilted in favor of the prosecution. So most of these critiques, they say that these military tribunals, they did not set a good precedent, because the rules of procedure, because those detainees, they could not see the lawyers for 2-3 days, or they could not consult in open environment. They had to be there inside their cells, and there the lawyers, those were appointed by the victorious powers. So lawyers would go, and then they would consult their lawyers. So this was all, not fair trial. Then there is also a criticism of ex post facto law. That law was not there at the time of commission of crime, and therefore they cite nullum crimen sine lege, that no crime without law. So this is a common criticism. Then there is also a criticism that nulla pena sine lege, means there is no punishment without law. So these people were punished when there was no law which was very clear. They did not know that individuals could be prosecuted. So therefore, what happened, that you might have heard that the justice from India, Justice Pal, he gave a long dissenting opinion. And if you look at the judgment of Justice Pal, you'll find that what he said, that these all laws, like nullum crimen sine lege, these all principles, nulla pena sine lege, ex post facto law, all these principles were violated by the superior, by the victorious powers. However, the judgment of Justice Pal, that was not published for at least for 5 years, because till the allies did not leave Japan, the judgment, the opinion of Justice Pal, that was not published. Now we will come on to the positive thing about these military tribunals. Finally, that what is the contribution of these military tribunals onto the humanitarian law jurisprudence? And we will see that the concept of command responsibility and the concept of individual criminal responsibility, these principles were firmly embedded in international law. Also, we will see that the United Nations level, United Nations General Assembly affirmed the principles recognized by the Charter of the IMT and the judgment of the tribunal in 1946. International Law Commission, which was made in 1946, the first task which was given to ILC was to draft a set of principles which would be based on IMT Charter and the judgment. And then if you look at the further evolution, Genocide Convention was signed, Geneva Conventions were signed, and then in 1950, International Law Commission was again requested by UNGA to prepare a draft code of offenses against peace and security of mankind. And this request made to ILC, that took a long time, because just after 1950-52, what happened, that Cold War, the whole environment of Cold War started, and then it was very difficult for the International Law Commission to work on it. However, in 1996, it came up with the draft code of offenses against peace and security of mankind. All these things, they are based upon the jurisprudence laid down by the International Military Tribunals. So what we see today, that International Military Tribunals, they started a new wave of the jurisprudence, which set a new branch of international law. Now, the people who commit such brutal acts during war or even during peace, they can face the music of law in future, right? So with this, we conclude today's this deliberations. If you have any questions, please ask.